we haven't talked yet about social media and the impact of social media such as Twitter, Facebook, perhaps leading the spirit of democracy.
There's absolutely no question that social media, the internet, the mobile phone, Facebook, Twitter, all of these digital tools of expression and organization have become one of the driving wedges of democratic change and democratic empowerment. We call these liberation technologies. These are extremely powerful tools, and as you note, authoritarian states are trying to monitor them, disrupt them, constrain them. There are at least, probably more now, but at least 50,000 internet police, as you referred to in China, who are trying to very rapidly, when they discover it, purge the internet in China of what they call harmful content. But it's very hard for them to keep up with all the expressions of indignation and exposures of wrongdoing that are pouring out in Chinese cyberspace. And if there's ever a new political crisis in China, this outpouring, I think, will overwhelm the capacity of China's internet police.
So where would you put the phenomenon of WikiLeaks in terms of its influence on democracy, freedom of the press?
Well, I think that we live in a digital age where a lot of information can be poured out into public view very rapidly. And one of the things we've learned from the WikiLeaks phenomenon and from the massive trove of top secret information that has been made public by Edward Snowden is that governments are under much greater difficulty in keeping secrets. This can be healthy in the sense that they should weigh very seriously what they're doing and ask whether, if it does come to light, it will be defensible. At the same time, we live in a world in which there are diffuse threats of international terrorism. And so there has to be a balance in which there is restraint and deliberation and protection for the civil liberties of American citizens and respect for the civil liberties of other citizens around the world, but very focused effort to monitor the electronic communications of people who could threaten the national security of the United States and allied democracies around the world. I think we are at a moment in the evolution of American democracy when these tools are very important. And the reason why is that our democracy in the United States is really stuck in a period of very deep polarization and dysfunction. It requires, I think, very, very serious institutional reform, including reform of the electoral system in the United States.
Could you talk a little bit about the rank voting and how that would work and what the benefits are?
Ranked choice voting enables the voters to rank the candidates in preference. And if you have three candidates in a race or three predominant candidates, and let's say one is a fairly right-wing Republican, one's a fairly left-wing Democrat, and maybe you have an incumbent senator, as in Indiana with Richard Lugar, who was defeated in the primary by a very ideological and narrow minority with a low voter turnout in the primary, then you can rank your choices so that if your first choice doesn't win, your votes can be transferred to your runner-up candidate, your second choice. Now, what would that do? In this day and age, people are very reluctant to vote for any other alternative than the Democrat or the Republican, because they fear they will be wasting their vote and maybe electing the candidate that they least like or most dislike. But if they know their votes can be transferred to their kind of second most preferable candidate, it opens up their range of preferences and frankly will open up the political system to more choice, more competition, and possibly more moderation, because the candidates on left and right know that if they're too extreme, the votes may flow to the center. Moreover, this may attenuate the very, very sad and even pathetic spectacle of relentless negative campaigning in the media. We know from much research and experience that when candidates go negative in television ads against their opponent, it damages them and their image and their reputation. They themselves, who are spending the money on negative ads, but it damages the target of the negative ads even more. So if you have a destruction derby when candidates are destroying one another with negative advertising, but think if they do enough of it, they'll be the last person standing. If you then posit a situation in which there's a third alternative who's running positive ads, the disgust of voters may gravitate toward the third candidate, and that may actually significantly attenuate negative campaigning. Perhaps introducing more fluidity with ranked choice voting so we can enable voters to not be trapped into a situation, as they sometimes are in general elections, where they have to choose between two very ideological alternatives from the two predominant parties. There are many other reforms we could cite of lobbying and so on that the Congress and the state legislatures are unlikely to adopt because they are products of the system that elected them. And so I think the initiative is going to be, in the era that we are entering, an extremely important tool for citizens to reform the rules of the democratic game in the United States.
So is our media doing its job to protect our democracy?
We know from much social psychological research that there's a tendency in the human mind and soul to kind of come to a conclusion, to a view of the world, and then seek out information that will reinforce that view. And in the digital age, where there's such a proliferation of media now, we don't just have 3 television channels anymore that are speaking to all of the American public. There's much greater capacity for citizens to find and live within what's called, in this realm of analysis, an echo chamber, where you're watching Fox News and it's echoing your opinions, or you're watching MSNBC and it's echoing your liberal views. And I think it's incumbent upon our educational system to try and motivate young people to think a little bit more and to seek out opposing points of view. And we need, as a society, to think of ways of encouraging interaction and debate among people who don't agree with one another. It's one of the most vital objectives now, or priorities for our democracy, because if we're going to sit at coffee tables like this one and complain about the polarization of our politics in the United States and the dysfunctional nature of our politics in the United States, it would be good if we begin by looking in the mirror at our own behavior as citizens and asking, are we in our own thought, in our own practice of seeking out information and talking to our fellow citizens, doing enough to weigh different points of view, seek out alternative forms of argument, and just follow objective news and information that doesn't have a political stamp on it. One of the things I'll just say that I really like, since we were talking about the digital age, is an effort by inaugurated by a couple of young people that has a lot of support now, called Policymic, M-I-C, Policymic, which is an effort to get young people, say between 18 and 29, who are liberals and conservatives, to interact in cyberspace and really engage one another in a respectful and thoughtful way. And I think we need a lot more of that.
Is Stanford doing any of this kind of work to try to bring these sides together?
Well, we certainly do it in the classroom.
Sure.
And I certainly make a very strong effort at it. And we try very hard to get students to consider different points of view in the policy process, and even in terms of ethical reflection. But I think we all in our institutions of learning could do a better job of intentionally thinking about how we can break down barriers of political preference and ideology, and barriers of race, class, religion, ethnicity, so that we can all, within this extremely complex democratic society that is the United States, engage one another in a thoughtful, open, and mutually respectful way.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Larry, for being with us. It's been very enjoyable.
Thank you.